So they're having a Conservative Party conference, and they each and every one of them will have chosen their most nubile assistant and made sure that they get adjoining rooms in the hotel.
Disgusting.
I betcha. What happens in Blackpool stays in Blackpool. Foreign Secretary Liz Truss, the brains Truss, has called for Britain's so-called culture wars to be cancelled. The party that is constantly whining about things being cancelled wants to cancel the culture wars. Me Smug said the same thing yesterday, almost as though a focus group approved memo has gone round. Here's the thing though, if they want everyone to stop having culture war arguments, why do they keep bringing it up? The brains Truss said it's time to end and shut down ludicrous debates on pronouns. Liz Truss is the actual government's equalities minister. The equalities minister doesn't want people to feel as though they are equal in some way, because some people's feelings are more important, said the equalities minister. It's also very, what would Donald Trump do? He'd appoint someone to a department that is ideologically opposed to what that department is supposed to be doing.
Don't be rude.
Like appointing an oil baron to be to the Green Energy Department, or Colonel Sanders to promote veganism. Liz the Brains Truss, the actual equalities minister, said the constant question and introspection needed to cease. No more thinking for yourself. That's right out. No more reflective thoughts. No more looking at yourself or hippie meditation.
Groovy.
All thoughts must be controlled, said Liz Truss, the Minister for Controlling Thoughts. In a speech to the Vladimir Putin Memorial Conservative Party Spring Conference in Blackpool, sponsored by Sberbank, Liz Truss said the UK's response to the crisis in Ukraine should mean a restoration of pride in British values. No one has done more for refugees from the war in Ukraine than this Conservative government, right up to but not including actually helping. And no country has given friendly oligarchs more time to spirit their wealth out of the country before pretending to crack down hard on them. God, fair makes you proud to be a wholly owned subsidiary of the Kremlin, don't it?
No.
You see, the problem is that people keep thinking for themselves about history rather than reading from government-approved volumes on how unimprovably great Britain has always been. There have been recent calls to reassess the reputations of key British figures, including, but not limited to, Winston Churchill, for views that they held which are deemed incompatible with the modern day. You know, views like starving millions of people by routing food away from them while calling them the beastliest people in the world next to the Germans, and saying things like black people aren't as capable as white people, and those in colonised countries who didn't like being ruled by a foreign nation are savages armed with ideas. Stuff like that. And don't forget, the actual British people voted him, Winston Churchill, out of office before the war was completely over. But, you know, I suppose those British people weren't really British enough, as they hadn't learned what was happening to them in 1945 from government-approved textbooks written 70 years later. When Churchill was the actual leader of this country, people then weren't so uncritical of him as those stoking the culture wars on the right are today. Almost as if you're a traitor if you weren't born after 1950. Pretty rich of the right-wingers today to call people who doubt he was a saint traitors when those who actually lived under his rule didn't think he was a saint. And they're upset about road names and buildings undergoing name changes due to links with slave traders, which the Tories seem to be weirdly incensed about. I mean, they couldn't care less about some street name in a place that they couldn't locate with a sat-nav. It just gives them something to distract their fans from when they've been caught out partying like it's New Year's Eve while they find us for meeting one other person on a park bench. Liz Truss, who is the actual occupant of what has become the comedy role of Foreign Secretary, told the conference, now is the time to end the culture of self-doubt The constant self-questioning and introspection, the ludicrous debates about language, statues and pronouns. Yeah, agreed. Let's stop talking about it. Some statues shouldn't be there. Take them down. End of discussion. She said, our history, warts and all, make us what we are today. That's right. So talking about it and recognising it shouldn't be something that makes you an enemy of the state. She said we live in a great country, a great democracy, and we should be proud of it. Correct. We shouldn't be working to undermine it by accepting vast amounts of Russian cash from shady individuals doing Putin's dirty work and allowing us to be destabilised from within. We shouldn't be trying to hobble democracy by trying to make it as difficult as possible for those least likely to support the Tories to be able to vote, by doing things like introducing ID checks, which solve a problem that doesn't exist. And we shouldn't allow the vital infrastructure of this nation to be used against us by selling it off, no questions asked, to foreign interests who only have short-term profits in mind. In short, this great country shouldn't have raw sewage pumped all over it as the current regime allows. And, of course, his imperial bodgeness spoke.
Yeah. Wait a minute.
He had disarranged himself specially for the event, his hair mussed and his suit hanging off him. It looked like a bag of sprouting potatoes. And here's why I know that they're saying we must end the culture war is the new culture war, by constantly going on about how we should stop going on about it. Bodge said, we don't need to be woke, we just want to be free. What the hell is he talking about? They don't actually need to make any sense now, it's just a collection of buzzwords. Woke, sovereignty, a dinghy. That farcical, soulless void that is the Brexit minister Jacob Mee-Smug was at it too. He'd read the memo as well, or he had somebody read it to him. And he whittled on about it was time to get away from the wokery that has beset huge sections of society. Only because you lot keep going on about it. Like someone thinking of someone else's feelings is an existential threat to society, you constipated ghoul. He probably bested anything he has ever said on any subject ever, did Bodge. And you could see him gird himself before he said it. I mean, there was a pause in his delivery, as though he was thinking, OK, here we go. And then he sped up, as though he could just sprint through the next bit and no one outside the hall would notice that he'd finally taken leave of any sense that he might actually be a decent, honourable person. He compared the struggle of the people of Ukraine, the bombs, the death, the misery and the horror, to us leaving the European Union.
What?
He actually said that out loud. He said, the instinct of the people of this country, like the people of Ukraine, is to choose freedom every time. When the British people voted for Brexit in such large numbers, I don't believe it was that they were remotely hostile to foreigners. It's because they wanted to be free to do things differently and for this country to be able to run itself. Wow. You sad excuse for a human being, Bodge.
Yeah. Wait a minute.
In a packed list of shameful outbursts, that is possibly the worst thing you've ever said. First off, the Russia report that he buried pointed the finger at the Russian leader. The report said no one in government knew if Russia interfered in or sought to influence the referendum because they did not want to know, said Stuart Hosey, an SNP MP who sits on the cross-party committee. He said the UK government have actively avoided looking for evidence that Russia interfered. We were told that we hadn't seen any evidence, but that's meaningless if they hadn't looked for it. And while all the Tories were throwing their doors open to anyone with a huge bank balance and a Russian accent, no opportunity was lost in ingratiating themselves with the cronies of the Putin regime. And if they really didn't know why all those Russians were so keen to make their acquaintance, then I've got a bridge over the Moskva River I'd like to sell them, because they must be the most gullible people on earth. So which is it, Bodge? Stupid or corrupt?
I followed the ministerial guidance at all times.
What a way to run a country, eh?
Dreadful.
Chancellor Rishi Sunak distanced himself from the comments by the Prime Minister at the Conservative Party conference in Blackpool yesterday, but not too distanced. He actually sat there in a TV studio, had a tape of Boris Johnson played to him, and then said that the Prime Minister did not say the things he just saw him say. It's his alternative facts moment. I wonder if their hearts sink when they have to go out on television and to defend the indefensible Bodge. Anyway, Johnson drew comparisons with Ukraine's resistance against Putin's Russia with Britain's vote for Brexit. He said Brexiteers wanted to be free to do things differently and for the country to be able to run itself. And Sunak, on the spot, said that Johnson doesn't think that the two are directly comparable, whereas he was just played a tape of Johnson directly comparing them. And Sunak said that Johnson was making some general comments about freedom in different guises. Rubbish. Do you feel an overwhelming sense of freedom since Brexit? Do you feel much, much freer now than you did a few years ago? How does that freedom manifest itself? I'd love to know. How much, on the contrary, has leaving the EU weakened Britain's financial and political capital in this current European conflict? We keep being told we're leading the world, but the rest of the world certainly doesn't think so. Joining us now, Jonathan Liss. Jonathan is a journalist and political commentator. Hello, Jonathan.
Hello.
So, am I being unduly unkind, or were you as nonplussed as me?
I think we're pretty much on the same page here. It was a completely outrageous equation that Johnson made. 3 weeks of relative goodwill that he's enjoyed, he squandered immediately. He sort of picked a fight with Labour for no reason, after there's been sort of cross-party, sort of unity and solidarity over this issue. He squandered any kind of diplomacy, any kind of goodwill that he built up on the world stage. He's impressed some world leaders for the first time in his premiership. That's now gone. The relationship that he's been building with the EU is gone. But fundamentally, it was not only obscene to make this direct comparison. A democratic vote, no matter how much I and others may dislike the outcome, can never, ever be compared with an illegal invasion with civilians being murdered. That should be completely obvious. But it's also completely illiterate, because when he was talking about freedom and how Britons were exercising the freedom to do things differently, quote unquote, Ukraine is literally fighting a war for the freedom to join the EU. That is the stupidity here. They are fighting a war for the freedoms that we have enthusiastically thrown away. That is the sick irony in what Johnson was saying. In Ukraine in 2014, they literally had a revolution when the government cancelled an EU free trade agreement. And we just spent 5 years and billions of pounds severing ourselves from that organisation. So if Johnson really wants to make a comparison between Brexit and Ukraine, that was it. We threw away our relationship with the EU. Ukraine is literally fighting so it can build one.
Yes, but commentators do say, it was an accident. It was a faux pas. He's made a gaffe, but it's none of those things. It's what he's always done from when he used to be a newspaper columnist. His stock in trade was a performance of giving offence. It's what his fans want. Boris Johnson isn't illiterate and stupid and a bigot, but he knows exactly what to say to people who are.
I don't know that we can even say that he's not any of those things. He's a blank canvas. Boris Johnson believes in Boris Johnson. That's all he's ever believed in. I made the category error in the last few weeks of thinking that maybe this one time, the first time in his political life, he might actually care about something other than himself. He might actually care about a country going about its ordinary business, being bombed to smithereens by an aggressive, totalitarian man in the next country. But then I just realised I was foolish. He doesn't even care about that. He cares about nothing other than his own self-advancement, and he will do anything, literally anything, to guarantee his own position. That is what is so profoundly sick about this whole episode, and the man in number 10, I'm deeply ashamed to have him as Prime Minister.
This is perhaps why many people have been describing him throughout his political career as a security risk. I mean, he was blocked from accessing state secrets as Foreign Secretary. You remember he was comically appointed as Foreign Secretary, a position that used to be one of authority before it became something of a joke. People at the Foreign Office did not think that he could be trusted with certain secrets. Theresa May withheld sensitive intelligence from Johnson when she was Foreign Secretary because number 10 believed he would leak information. The Prime Minister wanted the then Foreign Secretary, Johnson, to be not shown certain sensitive secret intelligence when he was appointed in July 2016. And in 2017, British spy chiefs were wary of sharing information with Johnson because they didn't trust him. How has a man that the security intelligence think is a security risk to this country leading this country?
I mean, it even goes further than that. When he was editor of The Spectator, I think he outed a spy and sort of did it for the giggles. And, this is, you talk about 2016. I will never, ever forgive Theresa May for appointing him as Foreign Secretary. She knew exactly who and what he was. And she did it for her career and her self-advancement as well, because she wanted to keep the enemy inside the tent. That was completely unforgivable and inexcusable. Boris Johnson should never have been anywhere near power or influence. And now we see the results of that. So look, obviously he was doing it to shore up his own position because he was worried that the culture wars are what, sort of gives him energy and political life. Perhaps he was worried that he'd lost some faith amongst the Tory Leave voters, especially, in the pandemonium of the last few months and the chaos of his leadership. So he was, this wasn't an accident, as you say. He was clearly doing it for some reason, and also because he can't help himself, like an overindulged child. He simply cannot help himself. He will, he has a kind of a verbal incontinence. He will do something because he thinks it's funny or because it amuses or entertains him in that moment. Obviously, it was scripted, so it wasn't an off-the-cuff remark, but that ties in with his personality, that he's prepared to ditch kind of unity, statesmanship, leadership, for a soundbite, for a joke, for a laugh. And that is simply, it's so inappropriate. And it just shows why, contrary to everything that people have been saying for the last month or so, that now is not the time to get rid of the Prime Minister. Now is exactly the time. He has shown exactly why we need to get rid of him now more than ever. Because if we are facing not only a protracted war potentially in Europe, but a whole new global outlook, a whole new security outlook where there is a deeply aggressive, hostile country, a nuclear power on our doorstep, that changes everything. The Cold War, the post-Cold War consensus over. Do we really want a clown, someone as completely ludicrous and obscene as Boris Johnson leading us through that brave new world? I think not. Now is the time to get rid of him and put a grown-up in charge.
I've seen what their future offering is to the electorate, and that is, and they've repeated it so many times, the various ministers over the last weekend, that it's obvious that a memo has gone round, and these are your talking points. And they amount to, we want to get rid of the culture wars, yet they keep mentioning the culture wars. We want to end this constant discussion on woke. And their way of doing that is to engage in a constant discussion on woke.
Well, yes, and it's not just the Conservatives, it's also various newspaper columnists who, sort of, I think Dan Hannan compared gender identity to gender difference to genocide or something preposterous like that in his latest column. Someone else was talking about the decadent West, sort of talking about pronouns somehow being responsible for Putin's attack. But there are some people who will do anything to drag Ukraine into this culture war, which serves no one but Putin, who is desperate to find some kind of pretext for his aggression and to find some kind of evidence for a decadent West, of which Ukraine is obviously a part, and that has to be somehow defeated sort of culturally as well as militarily. But yeah, of course, the Conservatives only have one trick, and that is Brexit. But so that's a fundamental thing. That's what won them the 2019 election. But around that is a whole raft of social issues, woke, that awful, completely misused word that they think is their only way of securing a second election victory, because they know that they cannot win on the economy, they cannot win on trust, because they've shattered both. All they have is a cultural. But the big thing is, the British public doesn't seem that interested in that cultural. You talk to pollsters, they say it comes very, very low down the list of people's priorities, because, surprise, surprise, people are actually interested in health and education and the quality of living. They are not interested in what people identify as. That is not at the top of their priorities.
Well, I suspect that there are just enough people who have that at the top of their priorities to vote him in next time. Did you, by any chance, look at social media today?
A little bit, but I don't know what you're referring to.
Well, I was wading through the soup of sewage that is Twitter today, and it was one demented tweet after the next, absolutely glorying in Remona's discomfort at what Boris Johnson had said. It was like an outpouring of well, I'll give you an example. This tweet's just come into me. Jim says, "You're not making sense. You think we'd be better off under an EU dictator as bad, if not worse than Putin. Freedom of movement for the EU jackboot, Nick." That about sums up there's like a tsunami of stupidity that I read today. Those are his fans. Those are the people that he is talking directly to. He wasn't talking to his immediate audience. He was talking to morons like Jim, of whom there are just enough to vote him in next time.
I'm not sure that that's right, Dave. I agree with you that he was talking to those people, but that is a deep fringe. That's really the fringe of the electorate. And those people were going to vote Conservative anyway. They were not Labour's for the taking. And I suspect, I think pollsters will back me up on this, that for every Jim that Johnson is able to lure with that absolutely boneheaded, nasty, nationalistic appeal, he will alienate so many of the floating voters that he needs to win another majority at the next election. There will be people who will be completely alienated and outraged by the kind of thing that we're hearing, particularly if he carries on making that kind of comparison and analogy. I mean, he has form on this. He likened the EU to the Nazis in the run-up to the 2016 election, which completely soured relations with the partners he needed to woo and negotiate with in the aftermath of the referendum. He blamed the EU for the 2014 Ukrainian trouble, the Donbass and Crimean annexation. He said that the EU was provoking it, which is obviously completely outrageous. That was the Ukrainian people who wanted that relationship with the EU and the government who betrayed the Ukrainian people in that instance. So, Johnson will say what he thinks he needs to say. He has no scruples whatsoever. And I just don't think that is a winning ticket when you compare it to someone, for all his faults, like Keir Starmer, who's going to be a lot more sensible and collegiate and appealing to the people in the centre who he thinks, I think rightly, can actually win the election.
Well, you know what? I don't buy it, because Keir Starmer has been so reserved, he's practically invisible. He has tried to take the high road when I think a vast number of people in this country aren't even aware there is a high road. And his reward from Johnson today was to be described as a traitor who would wave the white flag at Vladimir Putin. And the consequence of that is that Boris Johnson's ratings are going up of late and Keir Starmer's are going down. I mean, Labour is still slightly above the Conservatives, but that's narrowing all the time. What Johnson is doing really works.
Well, look, I mean, he made those comments, over the weekend. We don't know what the people are, how people are reacting to it. We'll see what happens at Prime Minister's questions on Wednesday when Starmer has the chance to face Johnson a dispatch box. And, I disagree with you that Starmer has been reserved all the time. Obviously, that is his default setting. But when Johnson made the Jimmy Savile smear a few weeks ago, Starmer really hit back and said it was like a right-wing smear. He completely lambasted Johnson for that, obviously over Partygate. Starmer's been incredibly strident in his criticism. He's called for Johnson to resign on multiple occasions. And now Johnson is the one who has smashed that truce. It remains to be seen whether Starmer will, if you like, rise to bait, if he'll attack Johnson for being so outrageous when he sees him or not. But I kind of feel that this is the sort of thing. It's a huge risk from Johnson because he thinks that, as you say, that it will increase his approval ratings, that it will shore up some of that core vote. But, at this time, when for the last few weeks, I think the only reason that the lead has been shrinking is because at times of crisis, people rally behind the leader. This is a scary time. And people, in the same way as they did at the time of the first lockdown, when the Conservatives also had a huge increase in their support, a similar thing might be happening. But, when Johnson sort of pulls tricks like this, people are reminded why they've started disliking him. And he just don't remember that a few weeks ago, his ratings hit as low as John Major's and Theresa May's ever were, and Gordon Brown's, I think, as well. And so they remember with those leaders, once the public made up their minds about them, they never unmade those minds. So with some politicians, the public never firmly goes on one side or the other. But with those prime ministers, the public did, and Johnson was the same. It's unprecedented for a leader to kind of claw back support after that. These are exceptional times, obviously, but after this phase, which it will, like everything else, and we're going to hear back from Stu Gray and the Metropolitan Police in a couple of weeks, and so that's going to be reignised again. We simply don't know what's going to happen, and Starmer is not finished with Johnson yet.
Good to talk to you, Jonathan. That's Jonathan Liss, journalist and political commentator.